Good morning. Welcome to Iron Sharpens Iron. My name is Jeremy Nettles, and I am the evangelist for the River Ridge Church of Christ that meets in Newburgh, Indiana at 5600 Van Road. We would love to have you join us for our Sunday morning worship at 10, and you can also get there an hour early and be with us for our Bible classes beginning at 9. We have been in the book of Romans lately, and that's one of the most important books in the Bible, although if you ask me, I'd say there are 66 most important books of the Bible. But Romans is one that particularly gets a lot of attention, and so if you wanted to join us for that, then we would love to have you. We also have another installment of those classes on Wednesdays at 6:30 p.m., as well as a Sunday afternoon worship period at 4, if that's a little more convenient for you than the morning time. You're welcome to come for any and all of those, as well as to get in touch with us at 812-550-6234, either call or text. Those are great ways to get your comments or your questions to us, and particularly if you would like to suggest a topic for me to cover on the show, or just to get a one-on-one answer. I do a fair number of those as well. You can also send emails to info@riverridgechurch.org, and we would love to hear from you. That is, of course, our website, riverridgechurch.org, and if you go there, then you can find, well, all sorts of resources, but two things in particular. One is a stable link to our live-streamed worship services and Bible classes, so if you would like to follow along with us, but you can't come and be with us in person, then that's a virtual way for you to do that. And on the website, you can also find our weekly articles that are also mailed out in our bulletin each week. If you'd like to receive those in the mail instead, then just get in touch with us and give us your name and address and tell us if that's what you want, and we would be happy to put you on the list. If you'd also like to sign up to receive our 6-part correspondence course, then that's a great way to do that as well. Those are relatively short lessons that just guide you through several passages and basically ask you what they say, and then it covers the most basic expectations that God has for each individual, as we have all sinned and we all require salvation. We also have a radio show that airs every Sunday afternoon at 2 on 98.5 FM as well as 1400 AM, and I encourage you to check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/River Ridge Church of Christ. Today we are tackling the next installment of the Eras and Epochs series. Previously, we went from the patriarchs to the slavery and plagues and liberation and the wilderness and the rebellion and the wandering and the conquest of Israel. And we noticed in that lesson some striking similarities to the course of spiritual life today, starting in slavery to sin, followed by God's decree for our rescue, and then Him leading us through a period of homelessness and struggles toward the promised eternal rest, if we follow Him wholeheartedly. Today, let's look at the next period of Israel's history, the Judges. Now, we saw what God was doing with Israel despite their many flaws, and we saw God's promises fulfilled, at least in part. But this is an ongoing thing, and so we might ask, how will Israel handle the enormous blessings that God has given? What God designed is incredible. In chapter 18 of Deuteronomy, beginning in verse 15, Moses says, "The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from among your brothers. It is to him you shall listen, just as you desired of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, 'Let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, or see this great fire any more, lest I die.' And the Lord said to me, They are right in what they have spoken. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. And whoever will not listen to my words that he shall speak in my name, I myself will require it of him. But the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name that I have not commanded him to speak, or who speaks in the name of other gods, that same prophet shall die. And if you say in your heart, How may we know the word that the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the word does not come to pass or come true, that is a word that the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You need not be afraid of him." Well, this is, of course, about Jesus, but, it's obvious in retrospect, but to the Israelites, not so much. In Deuteronomy 31, we get a clearer hint of exactly what God was talking about here. Verse 1, "So Moses continued to speak these words to all Israel, and he said to them, I am 120 years old today. I am no longer able to go out and come in. The Lord has said to me, You shall not go over this Jordan. The Lord your God himself will go over before you. He will destroy these nations before you, so that you shall dispossess them. And Joshua will go over at your head, as the Lord has spoken." That, by the way, is a reference to Numbers 27, where beginning in verse 12 we read, "The Lord said to Moses, Go up into this mountain of Abarim, and see the land that I have given to the people of Israel. When you have seen it, you also shall be gathered to your people, as your brother Aaron was, because you rebelled against my word in the wilderness of Zin, when the congregation quarreled, failing to uphold me as holy at the waters before their eyes. These are the waters of Meribah and Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin." Moses spoke to the Lord, saying, "Let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the congregation, who shall go out before them and come in before them, who shall lead them out and bring them in, that the congregation of the Lord may not be as sheep that have no shepherd." So the Lord said to Moses, "Take Joshua the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand on him. Make him stand before Eleazar the priest and all the congregation, and you shall commission him in their sight. You shall invest him with some of your authority, that all the congregation of the people of Israel may obey. And he shall stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall inquire for him by the judgment of the Urim before the Lord. At his word they shall go out, and at his word they shall come in, both he and all the people of Israel with him, the whole congregation." And Moses did as the Lord commanded him. He took Joshua and made him stand before Eleazar the priest and the whole congregation, and he laid his hands on him and commissioned him as the Lord directed through Moses. But what God had in mind back in Deuteronomy 18 was that when Moses died, he would see to it that there was another prophet like Moses who would fulfill a similar role. And the first of these was Joshua. He was going to continue giving the people of Israel prophets, so after Joshua died, there would come another and another and another, so that they would never be without a source of information directly from God to give them guidance. Now, the Levites also were given some responsibilities. They were given charge of the tabernacle. They were given charge of the rituals, the worship. They were also given charge of the ark, in which was the law. That's why it's called the Ark of the Covenant. The law of Moses was stored in this box. They also had the responsibility to teach and to judge. For example, if we back up to Deuteronomy 17, verses 8 through 13 read, "If any case arises requiring decision between one kind of homicide and another, one kind of legal right and another, or one kind of assault and another, any case within your towns that is too difficult for you, then you shall arise and go up to the place that the Lord your God will choose. And you shall come to the Levitical priests and to the judge who is in office in those days, and you shall consult them, and they shall declare to you the decision. Then you shall do according to what they declare to you from that place that the Lord will choose. And you shall be careful to do according to all that they direct you. According to the instructions that they give you, and according to the decision which they pronounce to you, you shall do. You shall not turn aside from the verdict that they declare to you, either to the right hand or to the left. The man who acts presumptuously by not obeying the priest who stands to minister there before the Lord your God, or the judge, that man shall die. So you shall purge the evil from Israel, and the people shall hear and fear, and not act presumptuously again." Now, the Levites weren't given any authority to make additional laws or to levy additional taxes or to certainly wage wars of their own accord, but they did serve as mediators and teachers and even judges, just not legislators or executives. There was provision given for non-Levite elders and judges, and the principle of subsidiarity is followed, so that there are joint leaders of tribes, and then at a lower level, leaders of clans, and leaders within towns, and even within fathers' houses, which is smaller than a clan but bigger than a household, and then finally down at the household level. So there's always somebody in authority, but that person always has to report in some sense to somebody else who is higher, going all the way up to the Levites and the judges and the prophets that God appointed. There were great benefits to this design. The people, as individuals, had access to the law. The law that God gave them was clearly understandable by the general public. The rabbis carefully collated God's commandments here, and they considered repeats and such, and distilled it into 613 individual mandates. And that sounds like a lot, but can you imagine if the civil law in our country were that short and simple? Just 613 things to worry about keeping? That's nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. They had access to God's instruction through the prophets. They were given provision for mundane conflict resolution that is, of course, going to be necessary, but otherwise they're mostly left alone. and subsidiary leaders were given freedom to guide as their own sphere of influence needed and to make their own decisions without worrying too much with regard to the implications on the other side of the country. It was a huge mistake for the Israelites to just give that up. In 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 4, Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah, and said to him, Behold, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. Jump to verse 11. He said, These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take the tenth of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and to his servants. He will take your male servants and female servants and the best of your young men and your donkeys and put them to his work. He will take the tenth of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. But the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, No, but there shall be a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. And when Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, Obey their voice, and make them a king. God knows this is a bad idea. Samuel knows this is a bad idea. He literally says to them, You'll rue the day. But they persist. Now, of course, it's worth noting that God had given the Israelites general permission to select a king in Deuteronomy 17. When you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me, you may indeed set a king over you whom the Lord your God will choose. But that was not a commandment. He said, You may appoint a king. And after they do this, it all went down the drain. They had several hundred years of this sort of libertarian paradise, an incredible amount of personal freedom, and no all-powerful government breathing down your neck constantly, extorting your earnings and prohibiting you from doing what you want and pressing you into service at its own whim. And they gave it up. However, as we looked at God's plan, we should also consider what Israel actually did with that plan. Back up to Judges chapter 2. Now the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim, and he said, I brought you up from Egypt, and brought you into the land that I swore to give to your fathers. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall break down their altars. But you have not obeyed my voice. What is this you have done? So now I say, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall become thorns in your sides, and their gods shall be a snare to you. As soon as the angel of the Lord spoke these words to all the people of Israel, the people lifted up their voices and wept, and they called the name of that place Bochim, and they sacrificed there to the Lord. Jumping now to verse 10, And all that generation also were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them, who did not know the Lord, or the work that he had done for Israel. And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and served the Baals. And they abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went after other gods from among the gods of the peoples who were around them, and bowed down to them. And they provoked the Lord to anger. They abandoned the Lord, and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he gave them over to plunderers, who plundered them. And he sold them into the hand of their surrounding enemies, so that they could no longer withstand their enemies. Whenever they marched out, the hand of the Lord was against them for harm, as the Lord had warned, and as the Lord had sworn to them. And they were in terrible distress. Then the Lord raised up judges, who saved them out of the hand of those who plundered them. Yet they did not listen to their judges, for they whored after other gods, and bowed down to them. They soon turned aside from the way in which their fathers had walked, who had obeyed the commandments of the Lord, and they did not do so. Whenever the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge, and he saved them from the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who afflicted and oppressed them. But whenever the judge died, they turned back and were more corrupt than their fathers, going after other gods and serving them and bowing down to them. They did not drop any of their practices or their stubborn ways. this is a pretty good summarization of the rest of the book of Judges. The Israelites were oppressed by their enemies as often as not. It seems to start out okay in chapter 3 with the first of the judges, Othniel. And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Asheroth. Therefore the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. And the people of Israel served Cushan-Rishathaim 8 years. Well, God raised up the judge Othniel, and verse 11, so the land had rest 40 years. Then Othniel the son of Kenaz died. 40 years, that sounds pretty good. Verse 12. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord strengthened Eglon the king of Moab against Israel, because they had done what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He gathered to himself the Ammonites and the Amalekites, and went and defeated Israel, and they took possession of the city of palms. And the people of Israel served Eglon the king of Moab 18 years. 18 years, well, that's a longer term, but still, they had 40 years of peace before that, so it's not too bad yet. Verse 30, after Ehud has saved them, so Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest for 80 years. Again, this sounds good. Just a relatively short period of oppression followed by a very long period of peace and prosperity. But before long, this situation becomes lopsided. So, for example, in chapter 10, verses 7 and 8, so the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of the Philistines and into the hand of the Ammonites. And they crushed and oppressed the people of Israel that year. For 18 years they oppressed all the people of Israel who were beyond the Jordan in the land of the Amorites, which is in Gilead. Again, God raises up a judge, this time it's Jephthah, and he fights against the Ammonites and delivers the Israelites from their hand. Chapter 12, verse 7. Jephthah judged Israel 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died and was buried in a city in Gilead. 18 years of oppression to 6 years under Jephthah, and do you notice it didn't even say that the land had peace? Because they weren't at peace throughout Jephthah's judgeship. We'll come back to this point. Chapter 13, verse 1. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord gave them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. God raises up another judge, this time it's Samson, chapter 15, verse 20, and he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. 40 years oppression, 20 years of Samson judging, no mention of peace, and in fact it even says that Samson judged for 20 years during the time of the Philistines. So even while Samson is judging, the people are still being oppressed. This is not peace. This is no good. Internal strife is common throughout the period of the Judges. In chapter 8, the judge Gideon narrowly averts a civil war over nothing. In chapter 9, the Israelites are oppressed by one of their own, who is a son of Gideon and sets himself up basically as a king. In the beginning of chapter 12, there is a civil war under Jephthah in which 42,000 Israelites are killed. That's pretty bad. In chapter 20, there is civil war again with 65,000 Israelites killed. That's really bad. The last several chapters of the book, 17 through 21, are a disaster. In chapter 17, we see a breakdown of familial love and a breakdown of religious order. In chapter 18, we see that one tribe is pushed out of their allotted territory by the Philistines, and rather than pushing back, trusting God, and taking the land that God has given to them, they give up, move to the north, and slaughter an entire town worth of innocent Sidonians because the Sidonians are a softer target than the Philistines. In chapter 19, there's a Levite who obviously doesn't care a whole lot about God's law, and he gets himself into a situation in which some of his fellow Israelites want to have him, but he manages to get out of that, and he gives them his concubine instead, so really lucked out. Hang on, that's not better, is it? They rape her until she dies, In chapter 20, the rest of the nation is rightly horrified by this, and so they decide to take the rational step of exterminating the entire tribe of Benjamin, which does seem like an overreaction. They realize as much in chapter 21. I think we went too far. And now the Benjaminites are much diminished, and they don't even have any women. And the Israelites have all agreed that they're not going to give their women to the Benjaminites for wives. And so this is a bit of a pickle for the tribe of Benjamin, at least those who remain. And so the remainder of the Israelites decide that the Benjaminites can just go and kidnap and take Israelite girls from that town over there, and if their families complain, don't worry, we'll protect you. Do you begin to see why the advent of monarchy was welcome after all that? Judges chapter 17, verse 6. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Chapter 18, verse 1. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Chapter 19, verse 1. In those days, when there was no king in Israel, a certain Levite was sojourning, etc. And finally, chapter 21, verse 25, the very last sentence in this book. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. The author of this book is not pining after the good old days of libertarian bliss. He's explaining how it got so bad. It was before we had a king to keep us in line. So, why do I say all of this? It's to ask a question about us. What has God designed for us? You see, we have not just a prophet like Moses, but we have the prophet like Moses to guide and command us. We also have the written word of God made accessible to everyone. We've also got local church leaders who are tasked with teaching and judging and guiding, but they have very limited authority with respect to just making up rules. These churches and households have relative autonomy, and there are similar, let's say, loose confederations and principles of subsidiarity that can apply. Mostly, individuals are left alone to have our own relationship with God without the prying eyes of busybodies who want to run our lives. Yeah, we've got, the heads of households and, in a sense, maybe heads of clans, I suppose we could say. We've got local elders who sort of represent each congregation as well as guiding them. But it's not like there's a totalitarian overlord just forcing his whims on us. And there are great benefits to this. We've got access to God's Word, and it's not that long. Can you imagine if our civil law were this short? There are individual bills that get passed on a regular basis that are longer than this. On top of that, of course, there are provisions made in God's Word for mundane conflict resolution, and we've been given great freedom. Freedom from sin. We've got the promise of heaven, an eternity in God's presence. Freedom to do what is good because you want to do it, rather than being coerced into doing it whether you want to do it or not. Freedom to meaningfully love. So the question is, what will you do with your freedom? Will you use it as an excuse for chaos, disorder, and sin, as the Israelites did? 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 16. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. Free, and yet choosing to serve God. Not using it to cover up sin. We're supposed to stay far away from that and willingly submit ourselves to God, who actually leads us down the right path with abundant blessings and flourishing. Will you use your freedom as an excuse to fight among yourselves, as the Israelites did? Galatians chapter 5, verse 13. For you were called to freedom, brothers. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not consumed by one another. It's so easy to say, I have been freed by Christ and I don't have to care anything about you. But that's not what Jesus wants, is it? Yeah, brothers and sisters in Christ don't get to just tell you what to do of their own accord, but you do still have an obligation to love them and even to serve them to an extent. A third option, will you, like the Israelites, choose to throw away the freedom that Jesus has given in favor of a man-made checklist-styled rule book? Colossians chapter 2, verse 20. If with Christ you died to the elemental spirits of the world, why, as if you were still alive in the world, do you submit to regulations? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch, referring to things that all perish as they are used, according to human precepts and teachings. These have indeed an appearance of wisdom in promoting self-made religion and asceticism and severity to the body, but they are of no value in stopping the indulgence of the flesh. The Israelites messed things up so badly that the advent of monarchy was welcome for them, even knowing that they were essentially selling themselves into slavery. How can we avoid these pitfalls? Well, the problem isn't in God's design. For Israel, God makes that plain. The problem was not God, the problem was Israel. And we can see this if we go back to 1 Samuel chapter 8, which we read earlier, but we cut off at a convenient spot. Verse 7. And the Lord said to Samuel, Obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. Similarly, while there are problems with the arrangement of the churches today, and while we may welcome the advent of someone who can take charge and just tell people what to do, smooth out the troubles, and bring order into the system, the thing is, we've already got one of those. Israel already had a king, God, and we have a king, God's Son, Jesus. One day, he will return in person, and you can bet he will sort out every single problem. Until then, your job is to let him be your king, and to do your best with the system that he has already imposed. It works really well if Jesus is your king. If he's not, well, that's what leads to apostasy and infighting and division and chaos. Choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And we'd love to have you join us in serving him at River Ridge. You can get in touch with us by phone at 812-550-6234 or send us an email at info@riverridgechurch.org. You can also find us at 5600 Van Road in Newburgh for Sunday morning worship at 10. I hope to see you there. Thanks for joining me today on Iron Sharpens Iron.